guys, welcome back. BDCKR here, and we're back with our weekly Q&A videos. This is Season 8, Episode 3. We've got a couple things we want to mention, just as sort of fun updates, before we get into talking about stuff as we often do.
This is what's happening to us anyways, right? So it's all good.
So do you want to start?
All right, so, we've got a cat, CB, and part of me feels like when a cat's been domesticated, as he clearly was, the fact that he was so comfortable around people, and then abandoned and left to be feral, that there's a certain fear and maybe insecurity. I don't know how much existential philosophizing a cat will do, but I gotta imagine that CB was scared, right? And that part of his response initially when he'd crawl into our laps and just fall asleep would be needing to feel secure in order to be able
sense
to
of safety.
Yeah. And so it wasn't bad that after he'd been with us for even a few days that he no longer chose to do that. He'd hang around near us. He'd fall asleep near us.
Yeah, because he wasn't as anxious.
Yes. And so so he'd like to hang around. He'd want to he still wants to be in the same room with you.
Yeah.
But today was really neat because right after dinner, it must have been the smell from the food or something, because I sat down on the floor beside him, gave him a little bit of rub because he's always sort of up for that. And that's the other thing too, right? The only other cats I've known, they'll, when you rub them and they feel really comfortable, they'll sort of turn their belly up almost as like, it's because they're vulnerable. So it's almost like it signifies, I guess, that they're really comfortable with you. But if you try to rub their bellies, it's like a trap. They will start clawing at you and kicking at you with their back legs with their claws out. CB actually likes it. So he started just relaxing, giving a rub, and then he just climbed right up in my lap again and relaxed. And he just rubbed my forearm raw. And I'm taking that as a sign of affection, even though
you had some barbecue sauce on your arm.
That must have been it. But it's neat because it's been a few weeks since he's actually done that, and it was I just thought that was a nice thing for today. Not so nice thing is that the car I was driving to work I had to drive into work this morning. Car wouldn't start. Battery was dead. And I couldn't for the life of me. I picked up one of those, those batteries, those portable batteries that you can use to boost your car. We have one. Couldn't remember where I put it. Took me a good 2 minutes to figure that out. 2 minutes of panicking. And it actually worked. It worked really well.
Yeah, because that kind of stuff, the survival prep, the saying that they have is that you don't actually have anything ready until you've tested it once.
That's right. And so I only ever charged it once. I think I bought it about a year ago when it was on sale. And it had dropped down to about 60%, at least the indicator showed. Still had plenty of juice. And it's the other interesting thing about that too is that the capacity isn't that huge. So, those battery packs you carry around, 10,000 is a pretty standard size now, milliamp hours. This one's supposed to only have 18,000. But I guess it's the voltage is enough to start the car running. Once the car starts, you don't need it.
Yeah,
because the alternator,
the amount of time that you need it for is so short.
Yeah. The alternator gets going, and then the alternator powers everything. So, that was kind of been a bit of a weird day. Yeah,
I have two little things to share. First off, this, and nobody's probably going to care about this, but so iOS 14 dropped not too long ago. The new operating system for iPhones, and that doesn't matter for us because we have Androids, except one of the things that it finally let people do was customize their own app icons.
Oh, we've been doing that forever.
Yeah, I've been doing that for years, and then you started doing that. You've been doing it for about half as long as I have, but you picked it up from me, and we've talked about it on the channel,
Nova
long time back. Yeah, Nova Launcher. We love it. But so everybody has ideas now for customizing their app icons, and I saw one online that I thought was really fun, which is somebody had hand-drawn all their apps, and then they made it so that their background was lined paper, and then they had all their hand-drawn app icons. And so I was like, that seems really cool. I still do want to keep my black and white aesthetic because now with my OLED screen, it actually saves battery, right? And it's easier to see for contrast, and I think it looks cleaner and all that stuff. Right. But I was like, but I do like the idea of hand-drawing stuff. So I got a piece of printer paper and a Sharpie. I drew out all my app icons, and then I scanned it to a PDF, popped it up into Photoshop, inverted the colors, and did little touch-ups in Photoshop, and now I have all of my app icons are all hand-drawn by me. So it's a fun mix. It's all the usability and efficiency of the old layout, but instead of a very sort of like minimalist, like business professional look, it looks like somebody's fridge because it's a bunch of drawings that look like they were done by a child. I'm not an artist.
Okay, so but part of me still feels like that you're missing out on describing the one other feature that you might not consciously think that you're doing it, but you're subconsciously doing it, is that you're making the phone less accessible for somebody else to steal it and use it.
That's true. Because I have all custom hand-drawn icons. I also have taken off on my home screen. I've taken off all the labels for my apps because I know what my apps are and I know where they are. And I also, they all just look like images, like app icons, but some of them actually are folders too. So I have, it just looks like a text messaging app icon. But if you click on it on my phone, it actually is like a subfolder with like all of my messaging apps in it. Right. So for people who don't know my phone layout, it would be pretty challenging, I think, for somebody to come in and use it initially.
Because if they didn't recognize any icons.
Yeah, all the icons are different and there's no color consistency between them. The only thing that's hard when using a phone that way, that's slightly harder, is if you've got a bunch of apps and you're looking through your app drawer, there's no sort of pops of color that you can use to differentiate between them. So it's a lot of times easier just to search it if you know what the name is. But if you remember what an app looks like but not what it's called, you might have a little bit of trouble having access to it, which is not an issue for really anything but games, I think. Because sometimes you might have a game where you don't know what the name is, but you know approximately what it looks like. And now I'd have to sort it out in a sea of just white icons. But that's why I have a folder for my games. Yeah. So that's a fun thing. And I know this is wild. We normally don't talk to someone before getting questions, but this was another thing that I thought was interesting and actually relevant to YouTube in general, but not our YouTube channel. So, I've talked with you a little bit about it. I've been playing a ton of Among Us recently. I haven't had a lot of time for games, but if I do, I've been making every effort to play Among Us in, all of my sort of free time for video games recently. And Among Us is a great game. I'm sure everybody listening has probably heard of it because it's a mobile game and for PC, but it's this great little social stealth game. I highly recommend playing it, and I really highly recommend playing it with friends if you can, so that you can talk on voice chat, because it is head and shoulders so much better than playing with random people. But I've been meeting some friends of friends, some mutual friends, on Among Us, and so I was talking with somebody, and somebody that I knew mentioned the YouTube channel in the presence of somebody I didn't know. And I said, "Oh, you have a YouTube channel. That's really cool. How many subscribers do you have?" And I was like, "Oh, I've got, about 20,000. It's like, "Oh, man. See, I have a YouTube channel, and I don't post a lot to it, but they do cosplay stuff. So there's a lot of sort of inherent market where if you make cosplay for, like, popular media properties, people will watch it for that, right?
There's a built-in audience.
Yeah, there's a built-in audience. And so they're like, so I was about to try to flex because I have 11,000 subscribers. And I'm like, so...
We're doing a dead game. Hasn't had an update in more than a year. Has it been 2 years? That's hilarious.
So first off, that was a little funny. Yeah. But the second part of it is that I was like, okay, but you probably think that number, because we're doing a dead game, right? And our audience is not the same as our subscriber base.
Right.
So I was like, you probably think that the 20K is more impressive than it is. If you have decent engagement, there's a chance that your 11K is doing you a lot better numbers. And so she had just uploaded like a couple. She doesn't have a ton of videos, like 36 videos maybe only.
Right.
And a lot of them were from a while ago. But every once in a while, a video of hers picks up serious traction. She's got one with like 900-something thousand views, and she's got one with 1.6 million views. And she's getting more monthly views than we are on average.
Right.
She hadn't monetized yet.
Oh.
So the start of that conversation was, oh, I guess your channel's still bigger than me. And the end of that conversation is she's going to monetize and also probably start making more money than us within the first day that she does it. And this is like passive, like income. Like most of her views are on like a video that she released like a year ago. And she's getting like more than 30,000 views a month, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. So, that's pretty cool.
So that's fun. And that's another thing that this channel has done now. Not for me directly, but in terms of good that it's caused is, she's going to start making some cash for nothing.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun.
It is.
Yeah.
That's an interesting conversation, right? Because I think the perspective of people coming at YouTube, there's so many different perspectives, but they each come with they're loaded with such sort of preconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I just think the transition was very fun, where she started out expecting to be smug. She got blown a little bit out of the water and was like, "Oh my god, okay, so you really have a big following." And then when when she thought that my situation was cooler than hers, I was able to correct her and bring her back to that point of excitement. But it wasn't. I would say smug, right? Not a bad person. I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but it was funny to be able to build sort of that excitement back up. But now it was still, even though I'm like, okay, so you have more views and whatever, I was still the person who knew more and was the motivating factor. I'm like, oh, you should totally monetize it. She's like, that's really exciting and cool. So I was able to sort of bring in a.
It's like it's the whiplash, right? From one extreme to the other and back and forth.
Yeah, she was like, oh, I'm about to tell this fool that I have way more subscribers than he does. And then it was like, oh no, never mind. And it was like, oh, but that's useful.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that was a fun conversation. There we go. So we've talked for a while. Before even
maybe we need more footage than I expected this week. Yeah.
But our first question comes from D.I. Wackygaming. Longtime fan of the channel, friend of the show.
I don't want to assume fan, definitely a viewer.
Okay, well,
and definitely a commenter, not even necessarily a viewer, but it's like the difference between, like whether you're a mathematician or an engineer.
No, but D.I. Wackygaming has made a reference to specific things.
I guess they like because if you see, if somebody on different professions, like one person sees a black sheep, they say, "Oh, there's a black sheep in wherever you are," and then the next guy says, "Well, technically, really, we know that there's one black sheep," and then the last guy says, "Well, we know that there's one black sheep. There's one sheep that's black on one side." Like depending on how rigorous you're going to be about the definitions. So, anyways.
Okay, somebody who watched, I think that was a safe assumption to make, but it's true. Maybe they're lukewarm on us, and they just are good at engaging with people. Anyways,
okay.
They say, do you guys think this game will ever get an update? Can you give us your honest opinion?
Honest opinion, I guess you break it down in two ways. Are we ever going to get a meaningful update again? I think probably not.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But I think, are we going to get updates? I think, yeah. There's been little trivial things that I think are required to maintain compatibility with the with the Google Play Store for sure, and maybe the Apple Store too. Mm-hmm. And they've done that already. So there have been updates, one as recently as May of this year, that didn't actually do much. Mm-hmm. It didn't give us any new content. Maybe they claimed it was bug fixes. But
didn't fix some of the bugs.
Yeah, they didn't fix some of the bugs. So yeah.
So that's unfortunate.
That's honest opinion.
Mm-hmm. And our next comment here comes from Ember Mist, who, to start out, has done timestamps for us, which we are much obliged. It's a big thank you, and then afterwards some thoughts. So there's a few points to this. The first one is, I'd argue that the best tank is Batman Ninja Batman. It was BNJ, and I want to say Batman Ninja Justice Batman. The acronyms are useful for discussing it, but when I am translating them, there's so many different universes that I get twisted up. So Batman Ninja Batman, with new 52 Shazam's passive even upgraded, he can be fully immune to all damage. 50% his passive plus 46%, which is Batman Ninja Batman, plus 10% from the new 52 Shazam equals 106% damage reduction. That's only with the Batman Ninja helmet. Pairing him with the Killing Joker and new 52 Superman is my favorite combination. Just make sure to have a special 2 ready once you're not outnumbered. And I want to say something very clever here. They said the Killing Joke and then just did in brackets R at the end, so it's the Killing Joke Joker. You read it twice. I think that was very fun.
Oh, yeah, that is.
Yeah. Just want to point that out. I was just talking about the way that the shortening of it messed me up before, but that's a very clever and fun way of doing it.
Right. So that's a pretty big first part. Maybe we should answer that before we get to the second part.
Okay, fair enough.
Just so that we don't lose when you lose, there's a bigger separation between what the question is, what you ask. That
we'll just move on, and then people have no clue what we're addressing. Yeah.
So here's the problem. I don't mind that Batman Ninja Batman has a tank, because his passive does work that way, and we're watching right now getting totally smoked by us. Mm-hmm. So there's a few problems, I think. One is he needs to be outnumbered for his passive to work and make him a tank. And because without it, with the loadout that you've got, what you're looking at is he's still taking 34% damage. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're planning on letting Killing Joker get knocked out right away, then he becomes a tank right away. but then you're giving your opponent an automatic 3 versus 2 advantage just to make Batman a little bit tankier, instead of using your third slot for someone who can knock out the opponent and actually contribute something to the fight besides just getting knocked out and giving you some power.
Yeah.
And that ties in the second problem, right? He needs 3 bars of power to take advantage of the helmet, and that normally takes a long time for most sort of team setups. So, but again, listen, if you're letting Killing Joke Joker get knocked out right away, then it starts working right away. But it's the same problem that you're giving up a potential damage dealer in that third slot in order to make a tank, a better tank, and you can't use the power if you want to maintain your tankiness.
Yeah.
So even that comment about, make sure you have a special 2 ready, you can have a special 2 ready right away, but if you give that up, then all of a sudden you're vulnerable again. And then once you get down to 1 versus 1 fight, you're starting to take damage again, right?
Yeah, it's a little more situational, and it's sometimes hard to figure out what the best way to play it is.
Yeah.
To take most advantage, and the way that you've geared it up, if you're not taking 0 damage, you're using a lot of the potential of your gears and your character and your setup to not even get full immunity.
Right. So I'm not saying that Red Lantern Hal Jordan is the best, but using Red Lantern Hal Jordan as a tank with that kind of setup to take no damage, he's already got 3 bars of power immediately. He's got them. He's sitting on it right away. And you have the potential to do a little bit of damage and get the power back really quickly. And this way you're actually not giving up 1 slot in your team of 3 in order to have a tank. You've got 2 offensive guys. You can just tag in Red Lantern Hal Jordan just to eat some specials, be a meat shield, and then tag somebody else back in for their tagging effects. Tantu Totem, Master's Death Card, whatever you want.
Yeah.
But there's a comment later, I think, with what I think is actually probably the best answer. And I could explain why, another reason why Batman Ninja Batman isn't perfect for this, but we can get into that after.
Yeah. So the second part is the discussion of the same comment. So still Ember Mist talking here. And they say, Scarecrow's ventilator mask is a bit worse than I thought, but still great. The reflect reduces the amount of damage you take by 40%. That doesn't sound that good, but it makes any character immune to specials with the Batman Ninja helmet and Killer Croc, the gear. It also deals some damage. Why it's so busted is because you can make any Flashpoint character immune to specials while not blocking, provided Aquaman is on the team. The water shield from Aquaman reflects 40% damage, the ventilator mask reflects 40% damage, and Killer Croc, the gear, reduces 30% damage. This means that you're immune to specials while reflecting 80% of it back at the opponent. When you take no damage, the water shield stays. Just remember to block.
Right. All right. So it's probably not that obvious to people who are listening. Maybe it is. I don't know. It wasn't to me. I had to parse this out a little bit. But the problem is the overlap between blocking, not blocking, and how you're not really allowed to take advantage of each bit to combine it, because you either have to be blocking or not blocking. And so it's like math, where the order of operations matters. Yeah,
so I think part of the problem is the way that Injustice talks about abilities, it's not always clear what does what and how things stack, right? So when you've got things that increase the chance of something by X%, right? When you put them together, there's 2 ways to put them together, which is just adding them together.
Right.
So 50 plus 30 plus 20 is 100%.
Yeah.
And then there's a way of putting them all together where they're multiplicative. So 50% would bring you to half, and then adding another 30% to that would be 30% of the remaining 50%.
Right.
And then adding 20% to that would be 20% of the remaining whatever. And so you'd get closer and closer to 100%, but you can never quite reach it.
So that's a more subtle form of it, where it's the math and how they do it. But I'm talking about even just getting to that 80%, right? Because the Ember Mist calculations to get to 80% requires that the reflected amount doesn't take into account blocking reductions. And blocking reductions happen before any reflection calculations.
Yeah.
So Water Shield reflects 40% damage. Great. But you have to reduce the damage first. Blocking specials reduces special damage by 50%. Killer Croc Companion reduces special damage by 30%. So that original special, you're down to 20% of what it would have done.
Yeah.
That 20%.
Or actually more than 20% of what it would have done. Because I think the Killer Croc works first, reduces it by 70%. So they're dealing 70%, and then the 50% damage reduction cuts that in half. So
that might be
instead of 70%, wouldn't it be 35% damage instead of 20?
What? Honestly, this is where the multiplicative versus additive thing comes in. I'm not sure which one it is.
I think it would be, because I think the damage reduction from Killer Croc happens for all damage, right? Not just for block damage.
That's
so
right.
You'd be doing 70%, and then you'd cut that in half, so it'd be 35% instead of 20.
Okay. So whatever that remaining damage is, it's a small percentage of the original 100% would have been.
Yeah.
Ventilator Mass reflects 40% of it. Flashpoint Aquaman reflects 40% of it. So you will take 20% of that small number.
Yeah.
If that number is 20%, then you're taking 4% of the original damage, and you'll reflect more. You'll reflect 16% of the original damage, which is 80% of the reduced damage.
Yeah.
16% is not a lot. And then the water shield is gone. Then you're back to taking more damage you're taking more damage than you're giving.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you don't block? So no blocking means that the blocking there's no reduction of the damage from blocking. Killer Croc Companion reduces the special damage by 30%. And so you're left with 70% damage from the special.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that 70%, Ventilator Mass reflects nothing if you're not blocking it.
Mm-hmm.
So Flashpoint Aquaman's passive reflects 40%. So you'll take more damage than you're reflecting. You're taking 42% to reflecting 28% of the original damage.
Yeah.
And I was going to say the best case scenario for the next part, but there's no best case scenario, really.
Yeah.
If you block, you take a tiny amount of damage, and you give them more, but what you give them more is still pretty tiny.
Yeah.
And
I think you give them like 5 times as much damage as you take, but it's 5 times of like a fraction of the amount.
Yeah. 5 times? Maybe 4.
4?
20 to 80.
Oh, yeah, 4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
So if you really want to lean into the idea of hurting them, but punishing them for having done a special on you,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the best way to really hurt the opponent with reflected specials is either Charged Disc or Raging Black Adam. So Raging Black Adam used to only reflect what he took, or it might have even been a little bit less, maybe like 75% or something. But now on specials, he reflects more. And I was taking a look at the wiki, and they actually said that the special 1 is the only one that works like the way it's described, where you double the amount of damage. But special 2 and supers, you only give back 75%. I mean, it's hard to...
Still a ton of damage.
Yeah, it's still a lot of damage, but it's hard to get the AI to do a special 2 or super. Easy to get special 1, so I think it would have been... If we'd already known the answer and tested it before, we could tell you for sure. But it'll take a bit of time playing with that team to get in the situation where we can find it. But it's so much fun when you get hit by a super, you get knocked out, and then you still knock them out. Mm-hmm. I love that. Oh, and Charged Disc. The main limitation of Charged Disc is that it only has a 20% chance of reflecting. So 1 in 5 chance that it does what you want it to do, 4 in 5 chance that it just screws you over. Mm-hmm. But that 1 in 5 chance is spectacular. Because you take no damage, they take all the damage. It's a lot of fun. Raging Black Adam, actually, the other thing is, because he's relatively low health, there's a good chance that if you just let him eat a special in order to reflect a bunch, you're going to let him get knocked out. Yeah.
So I think the just main takeaway is that with Scarecrow's Ventilator Mask, it probably doesn't work quite as good as you think, unfortunately. It's still interesting, and we always appreciate people finding value in lesser used or lesser appreciated stuff, because that's something that we like to do ourselves. So if you find the setup, and even if this setup works for you, that's great. We actually think that's really cool, and in general, we think it's a really good thing when other people find stuff that is gone underappreciated by the community.
I really don't want to, like, these kind of responses, I don't want I'm remiss to think somehow that we're poo-pooing the ideas, because I think it's a good idea. It's definitely worthy of discussion.
There's just a lot of consideration, and we think, not 100% sure, but we are under the impression that because we know that you don't have it yet, right? And that you're excited for it, that you might not have been able to see it in practice and might be a little bit sort of off base about what it'll actually do.
High expectations.
Yeah. So we've got one last part here. And I don't think we're going to talk about it too long.
Because somebody else brings up the same thing.
Yeah, somebody else brings up the same thing here. But we're going to talk about it here for comparison, because this is a much better way of bringing it up, I think.
Right.
So,
so not so much the content of the question, but the form of the question.
They first say, as for Martin Luther King, thanks for the quotes. I should have looked a bit harder, I guess. And then, as for Black Lives Matters, I know someone somewhere is going to get mad at me if I say all I want to say, but here's the vaguest term. Black Lives Matters, the phrase, is great. But Black Lives Matter, the organization, is bad, even if they support good people sometimes. And so, what I want to say about this, it's cool. People are allowed to express their opinions about stuff in organizations, and I think from everything that we've said about the police, we'd obviously be hypocritical if we weren't willing to critically judge organizations based off of what they actually do and not just what they stand for. And I can say honestly, I haven't done a ton of research into Black Lives Matter, the organization. I sort of know about them broadly, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of the specifics, I can't speak to it that much. Yeah. So my initial sort of read of this, I feel like I don't currently have any issues with Black Lives Matter, but I understand that I haven't read up enough on them. I haven't researched into the issues that people have with them enough to be able to say confidently that there aren't issues with them. And I know at the very least that on the high level, not for like individual chapters, but for the more global organizational parts of the movement, that there has been some criticism for misappropriation of funds for basically like the non-efficient spending of funds in the same way that a lot of nonprofits.
You mean like Trump's charities?
Oh yeah. And I think from what I have seen of that discussion online, that there is like bipartisan critique of that, where people who agree with them and people who even donate specifically to individual chapters say your funds might not best be suited going to certain places. So I know that there can be issues with organizations, and I don't know enough about Black Lives Matters to make a comment for sure. I would want to probably research it before I agreed with you for sure and find my own information. Yeah. But I think it's a generally good way of saying a thing.
Yeah, no, I'm coming at it same as you, right? Like I'm not well informed enough to say. However, I will say that as far as organizations go, I'm much more willing to criticize organizations that are meant to be accountable to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
So when we're talking government, when we're talking police, when we're talking any government agency, I'm happier to criticize them because I hold them to higher standard.
Yeah, it's also important to recognize what they're supposed to do and what the consequences of them not doing it properly are.
Right. So when Donald Trump, the TV entertainer, the real estate air quote mogul steals from kids with cancer through his charity.
Yeah.
I am offended, but I'm even more offended when Donald Trump, the president, steals from a charity for kids with cancer.
Yeah. And so, I think at the very least, in a lot of ways, and a lot of individual chapters and subsets and people who are in support of and work for Black Lives Matter, I have a lot of anecdotal evidence of good things they've done. I can't speak to the overall organization because I haven't looked at it.
Yeah.
But I think this is a sort of good way of bringing those concerns up. And it is important when you talk about this to say, like, I think the phrase is great and maybe this group is not, doing it justice. And I think that is, I obviously I don't know what information you're basing it off of, right? But I think in general, we need to be willing to have these conversations. I think it is super important, no matter what side you're on, to be able to willing to examine people who stand for good things critically.
Right.
Because I think there's a lot of, and I think that is an issue that everybody runs into, especially when it's stuff that they agree with, where they're not really willing to examine the people that they think are good, and they let the conversation end there.
My initial fear is that maybe Black Lives Matter is getting the same kind of bad press that the Black Panthers used to get.
Yeah.
Where people were left with the impression that the Black Panthers were dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And that it was really all about guns and whatnot, when they did so many other things for their community that were good.
That's true. Yeah, it is entirely possible and likely. I mean, It's absolutely, I'm certain that there are many people who are painting Black Lives Matter in a bad light that they don't deserve. But I don't know.
We're open to the possibility of.
I've not been plugged into that discussion at all. Yeah, is I think the main takeaway. So I don't feel comfortable like making any large claim because I haven't looked into it.
So here's a different version of that question. Or comment.
So this is from SS Junior Kazim, or just SSJR Kazim, and they say, if you want policemen and women to stop shooting autistic and kids and such, don't you want to actually fund the police departments with more money so they can get better and longer training so that they can know what to do in situations like these? Also, Black Lives Matter, the organization, doesn't actually care about black lives because all across America in major cities, black crime rate has gone up, black homicide rate has gone up, black people are dying because other Black Lives Matter activists are burning down and looting other black neighborhoods, taking away black jobs. The worst thing that's happening for black people is literally the organization Black Lives Matter. Also, statistically speaking, the biggest killer of black Americans is other black people. Black Lives Matter is doing much more damage to Americans, especially the black community, than cops. But hey, I'm just racist, right?
Or, let's just spitball a bit here. That original comment about funding police departments with more money so they can get better and longer training so they know what to do in situations like that. How about getting mental health professionals who have years of specialized training to deal with mental health problems and getting them to do the job instead of getting police to do it? Instead of trying to make police do things that they aren't qualified to do, just because they already have the increased funding that's happened over years, the budget's gotten bigger and bigger, even as violent crime has decreased. Why the heck do you think it would be worth paying police to learn how to be a social worker, or how to be a psychiatric nurse, or how to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
If electricians had to check out our pipes and kept electrocuting people by accident, the solution wouldn't be to train them more. The solution would be to hire plumbers.
Yes.
Right?
Take away the money from... Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, I think we've said this before, and we're going to say it again. When we say that the police system is corrupt, when we say we need to defund the police, even when people use phrases like all cops are bastards, right? ACAB. What we're not saying is that every individual cop is a bad person and that there isn't jobs that they do that need to be done. What we're saying is that the system is bad, and I think the system is also unfair to the people unfair to the cops. Yeah. I think the cops in the system are getting screwed over too. And obviously,
they're put in a no-win position.
They're not losing their lives as much as, the people who are the civilians that are being affected by this. But the cops are being put in positions where they're doing jobs that they weren't trained for.
And they're suffering too. I mean, I watched that video of that female police officer who was crying in her car because she was afraid to take takeout food from McDonald's or something, right? Yeah. Because of how the situation is. That's not great either. These are still people. Just because they're cops doesn't make them not people.
And so obviously the terrible cops, the people who are, out there murdering people are really bad, right? Yeah. But we're not trying to make generalizations here past the point. I think if you defund them, you give the jobs back to the types of people who are doing the jobs that need to be done anyways. Right. And you reallocate so that, the good cop, instead of being in a bad system that's oppressive and being forced to deal with mental health calls and being forced to deal with a bunch of stuff that they aren't trained for and they aren't good at.
And that's not what he signed up for.
You have, the detectives for like homicides, right? You have the people who are doing like cybercrime and like dealing with like fraud and dealing with identity theft and dealing with like child trafficking. You have all those stuff that everybody agrees still needs to happen. Right. You have those people hired under whatever umbrella you want to call it. Maybe they're still called the police, right? But it's just sort of built a little bit from the ground up, or there's a different approach taken to it, or maybe they're called whatever. But, you give everybody the right job and the right training for the job. Yeah. And you make it a little bit more specific. There's a couple more places that your 911 call can be redirected to. Yeah. That's all we're talking about.
That analogy is great. The plumber, I hadn't heard that before. You just said it now.
I hadn't heard that before either.
Oh, nice.
It came from a dome.
Spontaneous.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody else has said it at some point.
Now, we're getting far away from the original statement, so I'm going to repeat it. Also, statistically speaking, the biggest killer of black Americans is other black people. Black Lives Matter is doing much more damage to Americans, especially to the black community than cops. But hey, I'm just racist, right? Well, I don't know if you are, but that whole black on black crime, that the biggest killer of black Americans are the black people, taken as a statement to defend what's happening or as a rebuttal, has to be one of the most racist arguments I've heard. And whether you've just, whether you've been duped into repeating a point because it makes sense, or whether you actually believe that,
we want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but it's generally...
This black on black crime thing is a huge racist dog whistle, because the biggest factor in being the victim of violent crime is poverty, or living in an area with a lot of poverty. So as a result of years of policies and legislation, we don't need to read Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches again, right?
Yeah.
There are a large number of black people who are poor and living in crowded spaces. So yes, there are lots of black people killing black people, but that isn't happening because they're racist and they choose to kill somebody else because of the color of skin.
And also, there's another layer, which is that most people kill people they know. Most murders are people who are close to the victim.
Right.
And the thing about the race situation in America is that there's still holdovers from legally instituted segregation that are causing informal segregation, right? And so when you have black people racially segregated from a lot of other races, right? Notably white people, there is going to be more black on black crime because there's more white on white crime. Proportionally, when you talk about murders, it's whatever people are in an area, whatever people know each other, whatever people have access to each other. Right. And when you've got, segregation, that's what the result is.
Right.
So if we had a more racially integrated society, would we see that?
Well, but it's a combination of segregation, but plus also in those segregated areas, certain places are just have less money as a result of things that have happened over decades and centuries, right?
So I think I'd like to talk for a second. I'm in a class on prejudice and discrimination, right? And so the most sort of important takeaway I've had in that class so far is that we looked at the history of it, the history of prejudice and racism, and most of the class is focusing on racism because that's usually the most important example of prejudice happening for most of our history, right?
Right.
And I think I don't want to rank them, right? Because every prejudice is important to address, right? But it has historically been sort of one of the most important things. Mm-hmm. And so there was an understanding way back, like in the 1920s and before, that there were just racial differences between groups, that people were fundamentally better or worse or different in a significant way just because of their race, right? Mm-hmm. And so now, obviously, we've reached a point where science has shown us that that's just not true. That the distinctions between people's races, first of all, that race in general is not like a super meaningful thing, right? And the only sort of really important signifiers are visual, and those aren't consistent across races. So it's the thing that we sort of half made up based off of slight visual differences in us that are there, right? Mm-hmm. Genuinely, but that don't impact nearly as much or are nearly as consistent visual signifiers as we expect them to be.
Right.
And we know that people are the same in terms of like disposition and everything, that there's no racial connection to being a certain way. And that's not to say there's not a cultural connection. There is cultural aspects that make people behave different on average, that make different groups of people different on average. But I think what's really important when you look at that is what created the culture of African Americans in America. And they didn't pick their culture by and large.
Right.
They were, when we look at the cultural timescale, they were brought in as slaves. They were brought in against their will. They were forcefully culturally assimilated. They had their culture taken away from them.
Yeah. And
then whatever you think of as black culture in the U.S., and, there is black culture in the U.S. I'm not saying it's not a real thing, right? Mm-hmm. But whatever it is entirely a result of the environment that they didn't make for themselves.
It started from trauma.
Yeah. So any differences from black Americans versus European Americans, right? Mm-hmm. European Americans came in and created their own environment, and black Americans came in and had their environments created for them.
Oh, this is it intersects really nicely with the big argument about why Black pride is not racist and white pride is.
Mm-hmm.
Because exactly that. It's not white culture from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It's the country. It's the region from the country.
Yeah.
It's whatever. And the problem is when you've abducted generations
Mm-hmm.
of people and you have forcefully destroyed their culture, and you've brought them all here, what do they have that's common? What is their culture? You've eradicated the history that they have by bringing them as slaves to another country.
Yeah. So the problem is that, like, even at the end of the day, and a lot of the statistics that people will bring up when they're trying to sort of discredit black movements and black people, right? About, like, crime and all those other things. Even though a lot of them will be inflated, but even if you find something where it's like, okay, well, this is something that black people shouldn't be doing, that they're doing proportionally more than white people.
Yeah.
The differences between people are created by the environments around them, not their race. We know that to be true. We've known that to be true for a long time. That is unambiguous. I'm not going to argue about that point because that's just science, right? And so the differences between them are constructed culturally, and black people have had so little overall control of their culture. The starting point and the way that it has been moved and shaped has been consistently chosen by people who aren't them. And so if you think that black on black crime is an issue, because I think any race on any race crime is an issue, right? If you think these things aren't okay, if you are looking at all of these statistics, exaggerated or not, and going, there's a problem here.
Yeah.
We know what the problem is. And the problem is environment.
Yeah.
Because after a certain point, people will have all these discussions. And I think the implication that it is somehow a bunch of people individually getting up in the morning and making the decision to do things that will keep them in poverty.
Right.
Is inane. And I think it belies a fundamental sort of disrespect for the humanity of somebody to assume that they're actively and willfully keeping themselves in a worse off situation than they could be in.
It just occurs to me too, when you frame it so starkly and we talk about its environment, it absolutely is. And the difference is, in one case, it's control. The one case where you have police white, or not even necessarily police on black violence.
Yeah.
The police actually have control over the environment. That ties in neatly to the next point, actually, because from the next question, but the other point I originally wanted to make on this was that if you really want to... Oh, but that's perfect. Like, the way you put it is perfect, because it actually ties in. So, when people talk about police brutality and the racism that's inherent in it, and they try to excuse it by pointing out that it happens more with... They actually... or kill more white people.
Yeah.
It's true. They do, in absolute numbers.
Yeah.
But proportionally, it's actually higher. There's a higher risk if you're black. Mm-hmm. However, that still sort of obscures the point a little bit too, because you're looking at every case. Those numbers include everybody. Mm-hmm. So if someone's coming at a police officer with a gun.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that bad that they try to defend themselves and end up shooting that person.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have trouble finding sympathy for the person who dies if they were waving their machete around or pointing the rifle at them.
People can argue that there might be better ways of approaching it.
Right.
There might be better ways of de-escalating. But if somebody is trying to be violent towards a police officer and they're acting in self-defense, I think it's a lot less ambiguous and more okay.
Right. So... if you want, what you need to do is look at the subset of unarmed people who are killed by police. And if you think black people are disproportionately killed by police, the number of unarmed black people killed by police is even worse.
Mm-hmm. And then it's much worse than white people, proportionally.
Oh, yeah. So I feel like we need to read the next comment from the same person so that we can expand a little bit on some of these things that we're talking
So
about.
SS Junior Kazim again says the officer definitely messed up on the Jacob Blake shooting. He should have waited to get stabbed before shooting him.
So this ties in perfectly with the point you were making, and this wasn't the original point that I was going to talk about until you just said this, because it's a matter of control, right? So the police officer walked up to Jacob Blake, held him by the back of the shirt, followed him to the car. Mm-hmm. He created the situation. He had absolute control over that situation. So if that officer puts himself in a position where he is scared that there's a knife, where he's close enough that he couldn't respond quickly if there was a knife, whose responsibility was that to change the situation?
Yeah.
I mean, he put himself in danger as the justification for saying, well, now I feel in danger. I have to shoot him 7 times in the back.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the point I was originally going to make, but that ties in really nicely with that.
Yeah, so, we can talk around the statistics all you want, but it sounds like what we're not disagreeing about is that there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And what we are disagreeing about is where the problem is. And I think if you look at the body of evidence, if you look at the research, if you take a step back and treat everybody like we are, as a species, on the balance, the same, what we need to do about it becomes a lot more clear. And I don't know if there's a lot of sort of wiggle room that I'm willing to cede on that point.
Right. The original point I was going to make was a lot weaker than that, was really that if you're stuck from a point of view where you assume that everything that leading up to the point was reasonable up until that the point of inflection, or where things change, where things really go south. Yeah. Then you're going to have trouble seeing it, right? Because if you assume that everything that he did up until the point that he shot him in the back had nothing to do with the police officer, he had no control over it, and he was doing it. And then I had a little story about back in my internet days about how it was just weightlifting stuff. Now it doesn't seem that important, so I'm not even going to bother getting into it.
Yeah, so there we go. I will continue. I think I'm going to be like, not a lot more informed, but like ever so slightly more informed after all of my reading of the Predator stuff, because I've got a pretty boring textbook, but it's like a manual with a massive number of citations, and up until the early 2000s, sort of all the research, like the body of research that's been done on prejudice sort of summarized. And I'm going to have to read through most of that this year. So I think it is going to give me maybe a little bit more perspective on that. So stay tuned for that, I guess. Because we do... Every time we talk about politics, somebody has a comment about politics, and it lets us continue talking about it very easy, because we'll answer questions on injustice, and then people hear that and go, okay, my question's all done now. And so sometimes every week people have new good questions on injustice, and sometimes they don't, but we say something about politics, and somebody's like, well, I have something to say to what you said. Yeah. And we always have something to say back. Yeah. So it's a lot easier to sort of refresh that content, and we enjoy talking about it and think it's important to talk about. I wouldn't say enjoy always, because it's not like I'm getting like a sense of like happiness.
But it's interesting. I find it really interesting because I'm learning more stuff. I'm just thinking about stuff in ways that are different that I'm not used to. Yes. And it was like reading The Fall of Hyperion after reading Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Yeah. Where it was enlightening because I was able to look back on the first book and say, oh, that's what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I found that kind of shift in perspective and seeing things differently really cool. Like I just, I find it challenging and interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So there we go. We don't have a lot of time here.
We can add more footage.
I guess so.
Yeah, we got flexibility.
I got a lot of studying. I got some more readings of that Prejudice textbook to do, though.
There you go.
So our next question comes from GCost 18, and they say, are medium and minor augments bad to use on good character, or does it not matter what type you use, minor, medium, or major?
It does not matter. Because I had such a busy day this morning with the Carnot starting and a few other things I won't mention. I was originally planning on sort of going back to notes and going over how much each was worth for depending on what feature.
Yeah, the main takeaway, medium, minor, and major all add more or less to your base stat for each thing. And so the important part is when you modify your base stat, it just modifies exactly how you would end up. They just apply the formula to it, and you have the same max no matter what.
Yeah. So when you talk about base stat, you're talking about for attack, health, crit chance, crit damage. Crit damage, you start off at 150, and you can add another 100.
Yeah.
Crit chance, you start off at 0. You can add 50%. And attack and health, you can add 300. So that's why it has a bigger impact percentage-wise on, say, a bronze character to max out their attack or health. But each one of them, you're just adding another 300 to what their base stat would have been.
You think about it almost like a little like sliding scale from 0% to 100% augmented. And adding a major augment just does more, medium augment does a little less, and the smallest augment does 0. Once you get to that 100% mark, it doesn't matter what you use to get there. They're going to be exactly the same no matter what.
So the main issue with using minor, medium, or major is that you don't want to waste any. So let's say you needed 2 percentage points more to get to maximum crit chance.
Yeah.
You don't want to waste something that would have given you, off the top of my head, I can't remember what a major augment was worth. Maybe it's like 5%.
But you can't, because you can't go over 100% no matter what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it only really matters for whatever like the last few you put in are.
Right. And so it's worth keeping track of what you've done already.
So there we go. I think we'll do maybe...
There's got to be a couple. I want to get to the Arkham Batman
We'll do Captain Haze. We'll do the Arkham Knight Batman, and we'll leave the other two for next week just because we mentioned earlier that we're going to talk about it. Because I do.
Is there another two? Okay.
Yeah. So Captain Haze says, in my opinion, another contender for ultimate tank is Arkham Knight Batman. With his passive, he can start with 2 bars of power for the Batman Ninja helmet, as well as the choice of damage over time immunity and crit immunity or crit boost. If geared with the LexCorp helmet and chest armor with the Batman Ninja helmet at full power, he gets 100% basic crit chance and a total 75% crit boost if using his passive crit boost, which makes him a strong basic damage dealer as well as being a good tank. The 2 LexCorp pieces will also reverse power drain on top of having some good abilities for tanks, such as the 40% damage reduction while blocking and 20% chance to reflect specials. And he's a Justice League character, so he can benefit from New 52 Shazam's passive. The only downside I can see is that some of the crit chance is wasted if you have his crit chance fully augmented.
I think this is a winner here. I mean, I have maybe a runner-up.
Yeah.
But I think key is because Arkham Knight Batman has the damage over time immunity. That is critical. If you have any character that is able to avoid damage, the ability to inflict damage over time on them is huge. Actually, the ability to crush their specials, crush their gear, is also huge. So the runner-up that I want to talk about then is Blackest Night Flash, where not only is he immune to damage over time, he is also he benefits from it.
Yeah.
And I think as a Flash character, he could also benefit from New 52 Shazam's passive to reduce damage. So potentially he could be as good with Arkham Knight Batman, except Arkham Knight Batman has better offensive potential. So when we've got 2 equal tanks, then I think the one with the better offensive potential is the winner.
Yeah. But so I guess the main takeaway here is that Captain Haze hit the nail on the head. Great selection, great like gear setup, and a great, really succinct explanation too of exactly why he's so good. Totally nailed it.
Yeah.
So there we go. And that is it for this week. We've got some people we would like to say some words to, so stay tuned for that. First, a quick shout out to Eliza Your Extra Caton. She judges me for customizing all the app icons on my phone. This shout out has been brought to you by sitting in judgment instead of accepting joy. We'd also like to...
Yeah, it's like a very condo.
Yeah.
It's the joy.
People spark joy.
Yeah, when they criticize her for her approach... Yeah. They're missing the point. It's not to get rid of stuff. It's to keep the joy.
And so we'd also like to give a huge shout out to all the people who are supporting us on Patreon. That is Console Peasant and Edwoon, who are supporting us at the highest last word tier. Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., and Irvin Ruiz, who are supporting us on the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu Aris, and Gavin Malott at the gratitude level. I am always super shocked and pleased that the list continues to grow every once in a while and has gotten as long as it has. And it never gets old to read out the names of the people who like us enough to support us on Patreon. It's so cool. So thank you guys.
Hear, hear.
So much. And also, as always, a huge thank you to everybody who watches these videos, comments, whatever way you support it. We, as you know, if you comment regularly, we see you and we appreciate you too. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.